Berry Gordy's The Last Dragon is one of those movies where, even though it's become fairly well known, it still feels like it should be quite a bit better known. The family-friendly fantasy adventure comedy genre was big in the 80s, yet so few featured predominantly black casts that you'd think it would have been a big deal just for filling a void that had to have been pretty in demand. Yet it was only a minor success in theaters before becoming a cult item thanks to perennial cable TV play later. And that's too bad, because in addition to being fairly novel in many respects, it's simply a solid martial arts action movie. It's at least as good as better-known features like Karate Kid or the early Van Damme flicks. It was also very ahead of its time thematically, which is possibly the main reason why it didn't catch on the first time around. The story isn't just plugging a fantasy-inflected kung fu narrative into a cast of mostly black characters in Harlem to be different. The whole film is grounded in Chinese kung fu movies and Asian martial arts culture, tangentially achieving unexpectedly devout popularity among black American youth living in major cities in the 70s and 80s, which had been an ongoing phenomenon, owing largely to such films being among the most widely available and affordable to license for smaller independent urban movie theaters for well over a decade in 1985, but didn't really break through into the mainstream pop consciousness until the Wu-Tang Clan made it the cornerstone of their act in the early 90s, roughly 7 years after The Last Dragon debuted. Interestingly though, the film doesn't stop at simply letting a kung fu wish fulfillment hero fantasy play out with black characters in one of America's most iconic black neighborhoods. It frames its narrative and the portrayals of the characters as a humorous but insightful exploration of race and cultural identity as reflected through and influenced by pop culture. To wit, our hero is Leroy Green, aka Bruce Leroy, a young black man so enamored of kung fu movies that he's adopted not only the dress, mannerisms, and quasi-zen philosophizing of his Chinese movie heroes, he's also become a legitimately skilled martial artist and martial arts instructor in his own right, ultimately seeking to achieve a mythical state of kung fu enlightenment called the Glow, which will imbue him with superhuman abilities to change the world for the better. The plot kicks off when Leroy is informed by his own instructor that he's learned all said instructor has to teach and must now search for a new master under mysterious circumstances in order to reach the next level. This involves Leroy having to re-engage with his local community, where his long immersion in kung fu study has left him amusingly detached both from his own culture and the modern world in general. It also makes him the target of a fellow martial arts devotee and gang leader who's declared himself Shonuff, the Shogun of Harlem. Complicating matters further, he also gets drawn into protecting the life of a local TV celebrity played by Vanity, who's being harassed by a video arcade magnate and wannabe crime boss into giving his aspiring musician girlfriend airtime on her show, leading him to conscript an army of hired muscle, including Shonuff and his gang, to take the hero out. Now that's a perfectly good setup for an action story, allowing for several solid fight scenes, including a terrific all-out brawl and a blowout one-on-one finale between Leroy and Shonuff that walks just the right line between realistic hand-to-hand combat and the welcome payoff of finally getting to see the glow. Hell, the matter-of-fact reveal that one of them can already do it is such a masterstroke of stakes raising that you're likely to forgive that anyone who's seen one other martial arts film in their life will have already figured out what it is Leroy had to do in order to reach the upper level himself. But between the action scenes, you actually get a very funny and surprisingly nuanced little movie about identity and culture. Whether it's Leroy's clunky attempts at street slang, Daddy Green's self-amused pride in running an apparently rare black-owned pizzeria, or a subplot about Leroy's student assuming that because he's Asian, he only needs to learn to look like he knows kung fu. The tinge of race and class resentment in the villain's attempted bullying of Vanity's character is unmistakable without becoming heavy-handed, and the girlfriend's third act face turn even feels earned and bolsters the original central theme. Yes, the sequence where Leroy unsuccessfully tries to adopt more stereotypically black mannerisms in order to ingratiate himself with a group of Chinese hustlers who themselves are deliberately affecting black fashion and speak is slightly cringeworthy in the way most 80s racial humor tends to be in hindsight, but on the other hand, it did follow an earlier scene that let those characters effectively point out the however unwitting borderline offensiveness of Leroy presuming commonality with them just because he's decided to dress and speak like characters from English-dubbed Chinese movies. It's not exactly a cultural studies seminar, but it's certainly more thoughtful and clever about this premise than it probably needed to be. Ty-Mac was only 19 when he played Leroy, and he'd never acted in a film before, but he invests the character with an innocent strength and natural charisma that makes Leroy's mix of anachronistic affect and visibly legitimate martial arts proficiency. Ty-Mac, for the record, holds black belts in Jeet Kune Do, Wing Chun, Goju-Ryu Karate, Jiu-Jitsu, Taekwondo, Hapkido, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and studied under Ron the Black Dragon Van Cleef. It gives him a unique screen presence that fits the comedy and the fight scenes, but also helps his romantic subplot, opposite a more sexually aggressive Vanity, feel awkward but gentle and sweet without falling into the sorry trope of the emasculated black movie hero. Vanity, for her part, comes off a little spacey in the movie, but she makes it work, and Chris Murney is a lot of fun as bad guy Eddie Arcadian. But yeah, anyone who's seen it can tell you the main performance you'll end up remembering is the late Julius J. Carey III being magnetic as Shonuff, the most criminally underappreciated 80s movie villain of all time. And if you see this for one reason, see it for him. Berry Gordy's Last Dragon is not perfect, but it comes damn close, and either way, it's a ton of fun. The action is exciting, the characters are engaging, the comedy works, the soundtrack is a legit classic in its own right thanks to DeBarge, Willie Hutch, Stevie Wonder, Smokey Robinson, Vanity herself, plus original music from Bruce Miller and Misha Segal. It's really one of the better movies of its type from that era, and certainly one of the all-time great black superhero movies almost by default. If you're already a fan, you don't need me to tell you it's good, but if you've missed it up to this point, there is no time like the present. The Last Dragon is a real gem.